Hello and welcome to Living a Culture of Life podcast by Human Life International. I'm your host, Colleen Haupt, and I'm joined today by Father Boquet, our president. Welcome, Father.
Colleen, always great to be with you and our audience once again, talking about these very important subjects that affect life and family.
Yes, yeah, it's so great to be having these conversations. And today we're going to be talking about the Catholic response to Pride Month in June, because as Catholics, we're going to run into this everywhere, from the grocery store to clothing stores to the internet. Everywhere you look, we're going to be running into it. So just how can we have a charitable response as Catholics, and how can we protect our families, but also engage in good conversations about marriage? So, yeah. So, Father, what kind of response should we have when we go to the store, the grocery store, and we see cereal boxes and candy bars with rainbow flags all over them? How can we respond to this as Catholics?
Well, first of all, Colleen, this is nothing new to us, because if we just kind of take the whole issue of Pride Month out of the equation just for a moment, and just really advertisements in general, television programs, movies, periodicals, as disciples of the Lord, is something that we deal with all the time as we engage a society, a culture. And so how do I approach, all these other issues help us to really how to approach this as well, because there's very much, it's a similar story. And if my response always to this is kind of, let's peel it back a little bit and let's move away from the advertisements and all the things we're seeing, but to look at, what's the subject here? And that, to me, that's how I would encourage all of us to address this.
What do you mean by what's the subject?
So the human person is the subject here.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think so, because what happens is we can so easily get pulled in to the language, into the narrative, and find ourselves discussing, battling over something when we don't really know what's really fundamental here. And that really is the human person, the dignity of the human person. And that is really, as Catholics, how we approach these very difficult situations in our modern conversation with the world around us. And so when we start with human dignity, when we know that we're talking about human persons, and that's where we can really approach this. And I say that because as we go into the grocery stores, we go into myself travel a good bit, dealing with the airports at that time of the year. You're dealing with, so many things and vacation time for parents right now that you're going to be, in a sense, enveloped in it. So when someone says to me, and it's happened, on an airplane, ask a question, almost very similar to what you're asking. And my response always is if I'm dealing with, as a parent with children, this is a chance to talk about human dignity, to talk about, that we don't identify a person, by a particular act that they do. We might, how do we address the subject? We start by talking about the person who's made in the image and likeness of God, and the human person that maybe struggles with a particular, difficulty in life. And so this is kind of where I start the conversation. And so, obviously, if you have two grocery stores in your own community and one is, advertising and the other is not, well, maybe I gravitate toward the one. That could be one approach. But I think really it's a chance to have a conversation with, as parents, with our children, as pastors, with our parishioners.
Here on this podcast, like we're doing. Exactly.
So it's not something, I think we shouldn't be afraid of it, and we shouldn't be intimidated by it. It's something, that I have a choice here. I can choose either to let it rule my conversations, or it's a chance for me to talk about it and to realize what is my response. So maybe let me give you an example. So let's say that, we know that during this month, that you might be in the grocery store and you're walking in with your children, your grandchildren, and you'll see a whole rack of cereal boxes that now are painted with these images. And it's the cereal, let's say, that your children really do enjoy. Now, do you not give your children that cereal that month? Well, you could. That could be a choice. We'll move on to something else. Or is it a chance, depending on your children's age? Of course, it's got to be child appropriate, and only parents know how to prudently deal with that. But if your children are in a certain age and you can explain things, this is a time to talk about, what this issue really is about, and to talk about what does it mean to live as a child of God. How does a child of God, what is God asking us and how to live? So I'm not kind of directly answering that question, because the idea is that it depends where you live, what options you have.
It seems like you're kind of saying basically like, I think sometimes people want to just like go and avoid it all, like avoid everything. I don't want to exactly use the image of an ostrich burying their head in the sand, because it's less of doing that because you're like trying to like ignore something or be ignorant of it. It's more of like you just don't want to engage with it or acknowledge it. And it's like, this is something that like I just don't want present in my life. And so you're basically saying don't necessarily do that. It's a good chance to engage in a discussion of marriage.
Right.
But on the flip side, don't get caught up in the rhetoric and get pulled into like suctioned into this like debate about it all. Like kind of taking this balanced approach of like, it's a good opportunity to engage in conversation about it, but focusing on the person and how we can like human dignity, like you said. And
it's also empowers us to make decisions. You know, one of the things we do here at HLI is support, Life Decisions International, which some people who are familiar with HLI, the Boycott list. And, and here's an example where we do have empowerment and we have the ability to make decisions in our own personal lives and, products we purchase,
can you like explain what the Boycott list is for our listeners?
Yeah, what it is Life Decisions, has been doing this now for many decades. And in a sense of identifying, let me just give a few examples. Let's say you're dealing with Starbucks. Now, any of us who's been in the pro-life and family movement knows the positions that Starbucks holds and what it advocates for. This would be an example of one of those industries that's going to be very big in June that you're going to see. Yeah. And so, but the question before me as one who is being marketed, in this environment, to make a decision, what will I support? Will I support this product? Will I not support this product? And I think what's important with the boycott list is it informs the buyer, especially for myself, who's concerned as a Catholic, as a Christian.
So it basically says which companies support these kinds of things. So you have like informed knowledge going into it.
Exactly, because it's a full list, and it's lots of different ones from let's say, well, it covers a broad range of those who are selling products, are engaged in from hotel industry to the food industry to the restaurant industry. Okay. It covers a large kind of a swath of these organizations or groups. And what's important there for me is I become the decision maker, and so. Now that I've been confronted with the reality that a product that maybe I like to buy, now all of a sudden I realize is advocating, for things that I really am opposed to from a moral point of view and how it affects our culture, how it affects our society and so forth. Well, I can avoid the product. I don't have to purchase the product. And so at the same time, there are many products that you will find if you actually open up the boycott list and you say, okay, now how do I deal with this? Because really, my computer, the software I purchase, all this has been part of an industry or industries, different groups that are supporting the things that I'm opposed to. So here, can I minimize it? Can I avoid it altogether? Can I go in a different direction with a different product? I'm the one that has to make that decision in the sense of I know what I can do and what I'm not capable of doing.
Well, and going back to your cereal thing from earlier too, are you saying, like you said, basically in that case, it might be okay to buy it. So it's not necessarily wrong to buy from these companies. It's more of just like being able to make an informed decision of what you're like, how your money is being used.
Exactly.
Basically.
And I think, a person could say, I'm not supporting this industry at all. And that's perfectly fine. A person may decide that, that I really don't have an option, for example, for those of us who travel, internationally or domestically, each of the airlines, the major airlines are engaged in on some level in this conversation. So, you say, okay, what about the car industry? So we can really push this where it affects every one of us in some way or another. And so we have to decide, where can I have an influence? Where can I make a difference? And we saw this recently, with the issue of Bud Light. It's an example, of where people said, hey, I don't support what you're doing, and I'm just not going to purchase your product. And
we saw what happened there.
Right. And we do know that that's what I mean by empowerment, that if enough people pull together and enough people are really advocating, I know through the boycott list that certain companies were placed in 1 month cycle of the publication, and by the time the new publication came out, they were taken off the boycott list. Because enough people responded and said, well, I didn't know you were doing this. I don't want to support your business any longer.
Interesting.
And sometimes even just advertising that this is out there, and that was just enough. So even though maybe people didn't have enough time to react, but the company itself says, hey, and we know this from even some of the people we deal with, investments, for example, Colleen, that what they'll do is they're looking for those ways of investing in companies and in products that are morally sound, that are in line with our views and principles. And I've known people that have written companies and said, our stakeholders do not hold to what you're advocating, and we encourage you strongly, to change your position on this. And we've seen where it's happened, where people have so we should never think that we have no influence and that we don't have the ability. So
I think a lot of times some companies at least jump on this because they're like it's marketing and they want to make money and they think that this is like the new thing to do. And now there's like the whole slang like go woke, go broke.
Right.
And if people actually speak up by avoiding the companies, then if they're losing money, they'll realize that this isn't actually something that's helpful. So I think it depends on the company sometimes and why they're jumping on the bandwagon. I think some do want to push the agendas down the road further, and others are just like, hey, look, it's successful for that company. Well, let me jump on that.
And I would say, Colleen, it's similar to the whole issue with these drag queen hours that we're seeing in libraries and so forth. I think the main thing is what this is doing right now is people are waking up. Not woke, waking up.
Yes.
And they're realizing this is out there and that their children are being, propagandized. Their children are being introduced to things. So you go back to your first question, and since, for example, if I may, go back to the grocery store. Well, maybe I go very, very respectfully, I meet with the manager of the store and say, I've been shopping here for all these years. I bring my children with me, often in here. And really, I don't think this is appropriate. That if you wish to sell the product, I can't tell you what you can and cannot sell. But does it have to be front and center? Does it have to be so blatant? And and if maybe place it where kids are not necessarily going to be seeing all these images. Whatever is out there, it's a way for people to engage. Meeting with a local librarian, meeting with the local school board. So this is where we have to bring our voice to the conversation. And if more and more people unite, we've talked about this in this podcast, where if parents would unite together, where they would work as kind of a coalition and address these issues. And we know it's not always going to be easy.
And I think it also shows the importance of having a good relationship with the community around you first, because I think a lot of times people paint us as like it's hate speech. Oh, they're attacking us. But if you already have that good relationship, like you're regular, like, I don't know, I grew up in a small town. So like, the person who's selling you the store owner or the person who's selling it to you. Right. And if you already have that relationship, then when you come to them, they're going to respect your opinion and they're going to know that you're not a hateful person, that you're saying this out of concern for children or out of concern for the community. Right. And I think it really just shows the importance of Catholics having to be engaged in the community around them and have those relationships so that when they do say something, it actually carries a little bit more weight with it too. That's more on a local level versus a big level.
And also just getting involved with people, in the community that may not be Catholic, but they're fellow Christians who share those same values and those same principles. It could be part of the Jewish community. It could be a very large. So I want to affirm what you just said. Is we sadly in modern times, communities are not necessarily communities anymore. I might live in a community, but many people don't know each other. So this is also a chance, to find out what your neighbors think are. And sometimes that can be very difficult. But I do believe that that's all part of this. And then this goes back to what I started with, is how we approach. So you said it very clearly. This is, we're labeled as being, hate speech or so forth. We that is not our starting point in this conversation, and we should not let we be labeled that way. And so, nor do we want to give the opportunity to be labeled that way, because we did approach something from the wrong point of view. And what I mean by that is we approached it not from a respectful, not from a firm resolve, but getting caught up in anger and frustration and allowing that to become the way we approach it. So I just want to return to that and that human respect, that human dignity, and then we can then have a conversation about this.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned the libraries already too, and I know that in June there's usually a lot of books that are out there, like displays for children promoting.
Right.
How can parents respond to that in the community? Like, what I know that there's been like lots of different initiatives over the years of different ideas for people to get these books out of the library, either by like asking the library to take them out and and the library just usually labels them banned books, but or people checking them out of the library so that they're not on the shelves for children. Like, do you have any thoughts on any actual ways that parents can go about it that might actually be effective in getting books removed, instead of just giving it like a badge of approval of like, hey, look, people don't like this, it's controversial, we should keep it because this is a good discussion?
Well, I think, if we step back, I've seen where, and I'm very active, parent groups get together and approach their local school board, approach their local school board representative, and bring these into a deeper conversation. I've seen where they've been able successfully to have the textbook, the books themselves, placed in a section of the library. If they could not get them outwardly removed, they were able to get them designated to a particular section of the library that was not allowed for children. And so they basically, if you will, it was just a section just for adults only. But the problem is these books are written specifically for children. And this is where the real trouble begins, because children are being aimed at. The language is directly aimed at children. It's to bring them into this language, into this narrative. And that's why parents should not take this lightly and realize that if I can't have them where they're at least segmented or designated in a certain area, and just say to my children, those are not off limits to you. You're not to go in that section at all. If I can't get that to be done, then we may have to take it to a different conversation. That is, this is just, as it is, unacceptable for children, but calling upon the library leaders and the school board to take a more aggressive stand that we don't want this in our library. We don't want our children to be propagandized and to be used in this conversation, because that's what's going on. And so the challenge really is that each school board is different. We here in Virginia, people remember, the headlines, the battles in Fairfax area, and so it can get very, very heated. But that shows you how important it is. We need to be engaged in this. So I would encourage parents, first of all, what does their local library have? Are they familiar with what's being? Because sometimes what happens is those books are not. I've heard stories where they're not allowed to be checked out. So that means that the children can come in, the young ones can come in the library, but that particular set of books are not allowed to be taken home, which means it's to keep the parents out of the loop.
Yeah, so
they don't
kids
know
are looking
children,
at it when they're there without, their parents aren't necessarily looking over their shoulder when they're looking at books in the library. Interesting. And also then you can't check them out so other people can't read them.
Exactly. So what happens is that, so sometimes parents don't realize what their children are being exposed to. So it's important for parents, as I've written many times, to be aware, to talk to your children. This is a chance to talk to your children. Yeah. And so that's why, returning back to the beginning part, we don't label people. For example, when I'm speaking about the situation with those who are dealing with same-sex attraction, is trying to move away from the language of identification. It's saying that a person is homosexual, a person is in the LGBT community. Trying to pull away from that use of that. Those are their terms. We don't want to identify someone from that point of view. We look at the individual and know that this person is made in the image and likeness of God. This person has dignity as I have dignity, and is to be loved and to be respected, and always, to be treated with the utmost of respect in situations, even as each individual might struggle with a particular aspect of a result of the fall.
Yeah, and we all struggle with different things. Like you have people that struggle with alcohol abuse, or you have people that struggle with anger issues, or people that struggle with all sorts of different, every one of us is sinful. Except for Mary, we're all sinful. That's right. So we all have things we struggle with, and that's just one thing that people struggle with.
And that's how we can have a conversation with a young child or an adolescent is starting in that area, especially as Catholics. I mean, we know that a result of the fall is the struggle that we have, in being wounded, and that sometimes, our feelings, our passions can be misguided, that the things that we think are good are not necessarily good for us, and maybe sometimes the choices that we have in front of us, the struggles that we have, we oftentimes try to justify, but in reality are not good for us as disciples of the Lord, made in the image and likeness of our Creator. So it's a great way to have a conversation, and to also to help someone see that maybe they themselves are not struggling, but they might have someone they know. They might know of a situation, and it's a chance to have a conversation. How do we treat that individual? How should we respond?
Well, I was going to say that was just going to be my next question: is how can we help the people in our community who are struggling with this? Right. Especially, it's a good time to engage in that conversation right now. Like, just as Catholics, to be aware of it right now, since we are going to be in the middle of Pride Month. So, how can we help people who are struggling with that?
Right.
So yeah.
So I brought some document in front of me, but this is something I always like to turn to as well, is relying upon those within the Catholic Church who are dealing with a very specialized apostolic ministry. Courage is an example of that. And I brought some papers from their handbook. And for those that are unfamiliar with Courage, this is a beautiful apostolic ministry that's been with us for many decades that is serving men and women who are struggling with same-sex attraction, and also supporting their families, their friends, and really building a community that is there to support those who are struggling in this, but to live as we all are called to live, in fidelity to Christ and to his teaching, and to live in line with the moral life that each of us are called to live. And so, again, it's a moment to really help, back to the idea of how do we approach, what can we speak? I mean, obviously, I might not be able to bring this conversation up in the school board meeting, but there is a way to approach the school board meeting and bring knowledge and bring a response. But when we're dealing with each other and we're dealing with our children and adolescents and young adults and we're trying to respond, this is the starting point. And to say that, each of us, as you said, deals with our own human weakness. And sometimes some deal with things much differently than the neighbor next door, one's own sibling, one's own cousins. And so, but if we start with the fact that we are made in the image and likeness of God, that we're made with this beautiful dignity, and we're called to respond to that dignity as Christ teaches us, then it's a different way of approach.
I think it's I sometimes feel like it's really important for Catholics to remember that the reason that there's things that we're not supposed to do is for the sake of something good. I think we can fall into this is a no, 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 no. And just remembering that whenever we're saying no, it's because we're saying yes to something higher.
Right.
And something that's actually good. And we're saying yes to marriage as it's intended to be.
Correct.
And I think it's really important for Catholics to remember that, whenever you're having these conversations, to remember it's for the sake of something that's beautiful and good.
Exactly. And so when you're talking about continence, you're talking about chastity, when we're talking about, because when a person identifies themselves and says, I'm gay, or I'm, or transgender, or, immediately we're kind of pulled into a language. We need to pull back from that and say, no, that is not who you are. Right, and that's very hard today, because that's not how the narrative goes in the culture. It's not how the narrative goes in mainline media. So obviously, immediately you're setting yourself, up for a conversation, a debate. But that's the moment to have that kind of conversation and to be able to say that no, that's not who you are. It may be what you're struggling with. Maybe you're struggling with something that is very real to you and something that's it's sometimes you don't think you can overcome. But that's where you have this kind of conversation. I mean, and this is where you open up the door, to have that conversation about dignity and about that you're not alone. This is where I love about Courage, because it really builds a community of support. And
so you have someone to walk with you, basically?
Right, to support, because we all need that. See, we're back to relationship now. Yeah. And sometimes people will label us as saying, but people who struggle with the same-sex attraction, don't they have a right to love? Well, let's, again, peel back. Because we're made in the image and likeness of God, we're also made for relationship. We're made for community. And of course, we're made for friendships. But at the same time, there are different levels of friendship. And there's different levels of expression of love, of intimacy. And so this is, again, a chance to have the conversation about what continence means. And so sometimes people try to equate, continence and chastity. And when they really are talking about chastity, they're talking about continence. And so the idea is that, that I don't open myself up to behaviors or actions or choices that lend itself towards inappropriate behavior that goes against the very nature of the human person, the dignity of the human person. So just use myself, I am not an eligible bachelor, all right? Nor should I present myself in any manner, whether I'm wearing clerical garb or wearing secular garb. Should not present myself as being someone that's free, that open myself up to some type of relationship that starts crossing barriers. So I don't go around holding hands, I don't go around hugging on people and kissing on people. These are just simple things that really speak of something deeper at work. And then with that comes the mindset of the virtue of chastity, and it begins to build on that. But it starts really, by understanding, how I respond to certain things. That feelings are very part of our human nature. We all have feelings, but there are some feelings that are really, if not properly guarded and guided, can lead me to some very bad choices and lead me to make some very bad decisions in life.
Well, they're supposed to be under the guidance of the intellect in a sense. It's not like the intellect is supposed to squash all feelings. It's that your mind is supposed to help order your feelings in such a way. I took a whole class on passions in college.
And even within marriage,
yeah,
there's chastity within marriage. And so it's important to have, this is why it's an opportunity, though we're kind of approaching this from different directions in the sense of how do we deal with the public forum? So stores and advertisements and the whole Pride Month. But then what we've done here is we've actually peeled it back and realizing that there is a bigger issue. But what's brought this to the front stage is the lack of really talking about this and helping, especially young adults, because they're the ones that are most victimized in this conversation, because they're the ones that the whole media and social media aims at. Yeah. They're the ones that have been propagandized for many years to believe the narrative. And to believe that what you and I are talking about today would be perceived as hate speech. And
to believe that if you jump on that and you get into that community, you'll have a community. That's what I think a lot of times it's like, oh, if I do this, then I'm special, I'm accepted. Right. There's this community around me. And I think it's important to show that you try just living as a chaste person, you still have this community.
Exactly.
Making sure that people aren't joining this because they're feeling isolated.
Right. And friendships are very important. It goes back, again, I'm going to use myself. As a priest, you can't travel this road alone. So so you find support in brother priests. You find support in faithful Catholics. You find support in faithful families and married couples. And that support is very important. And at the same time, that you realize also one's spiritual life, one's prayer life, one's growth in practicing virtue, opening oneself up to cooperate more and more with grace, acknowledging one's own weaknesses, finding, the sort of spiritual direction to address those and how to appropriately address them. So it's all of us, and even for married couples, to have other married couples, that support them in living a chaste marriage and living a happy marriage. And, we all need that kind of support. So what would make me think that someone that is struggling with a particular cross, a particular difficulty, somehow can walk this road by themselves? They can't. And if they do, it inevitably will end up not always, most of the time, not in the best situation.
Yeah.
And so we need that support. We all do. Single people who are called to live a life of purity and a chaste life need each other and need friends that are going to not say, hey, just act out on it. No, you need friends that say, hey, you might want to be careful here. You're kind of treading on some dangerous ground. Some of these behaviors are maybe inappropriate. You're opening yourself up. You're putting yourself in a difficult situation. This is, again, what I love about courage, because it looks at the person a body and soul. It doesn't break it down like our culture does and wants to treat sexuality as kind of separate from the person. No, the person is, a body and a soul. Is a body, and it's not just a body, not just a biological entity, not just an emotion.
It's a holistic approach to the human person.
And that's what I love about courage. It looks at the whole person. It looks at the person. And so, an example, I have friends that I've known for decades that struggle with same-sex attraction.
Okay.
And sadly have fallen into some difficulties at times and have risen out of it. And it's always been, the idea is but real friends are able to love someone through it all, to be there, not, and say, look, I'm here.
Not affirming what they're doing, but at the same time affirming, not affirming the actions, but making sure that the person knows that they're loved and valued for who they are, not for what they're doing.
Exactly. And I think it's so important. And that's what I love about, again, what it means to be a disciple of the Lord, what it means to be a Catholic, what it also means, what we hold as Catholics. And that's why today, I'm just like yourself, I'm not ashamed of talking about this subject. And I'm not afraid of the subject because we're dealing with human persons. And as I would approach, in the situation, again, the narrative today, again, for those that are interested, if you go to the website for Courage, you can receive not only, let's say, that a person themselves may be struggling, they will find tremendous resources and chapters maybe in their local community. Parents, siblings, good friends who have friends that are dealing with this. All these resources are there. And
it's so necessary.
It's so important, and it's also you're not going to find answers to your first two questions of how to deal with the public forum. But what it does, though, is it gives the church's understanding of the human person, and it helps the person understand how do we approach. In other words, when you walk into a situation like that, what's the first approach? The first approach is to see the person, not to see what the person has done, to see the person or what the person may be wanting to do. See the person. And start the conversation there.
Yeah. Well, it seems like in summary then, the kind of answer to this question is that we shouldn't be afraid to engage in this discussion during Pride Month.
Right.
Pride Month with quotes around that.
Right.
But, just not being afraid to engage in that discussion, obviously do what you can to protect your family, but at the same time, we can't just avoid the problems in our culture. We need to be able to engage in them and approach each person and be able to have that discussion. And ultimately the goal is to lead each individual to God. And this can be a really good opportunity to kind of engage
filters.
in that.
I travel a lot and not just in June that we deal with this issue. It's every month. It's 24/7. So
it's just over the top.
It's just raised to a higher level within a particular month. But filters are important. Being able to discern. There are many things that I'm a very observant person, but and I see things, but then I can also just kind of click them off. I'm just not going to get caught in it. I'm just not going to participate in it. If I happen to be, this also happens. You can be connecting to the Wi-Fi in a hotel or in the airport on an airplane, and sometimes during certain months you'll get these kinds of advertisements that it'll come through. Well, I just fast forward it, or I just turn the sound off, and or I just kind of just close my eyes for a moment, let it pass. So. Again, it's building up, the what I call filters, and parents have to know their children, and parents have to make the best decision they can. But
because you don't want to get numb to it. No. You don't want to get to the point where you're like, oh, okay, this is fine. But at the same time, you can't. It's not always practical to be able to avoid it entirely. No, exactly. So being able to remain sensitive to what they're the propaganda is trying to do, but at the same time, Right. Nor do
I have. And again, a person makes their own decision. Nor do I have to fight every fight. So it's a learning, and I think that's to me how
prudence.
Right. It's how I approach it. And so, like I said, you have to go back to the boycott list we talked about. I would think that's a great tool for those that really are interested, not just in the situation that will happen in June, but also throughout the year.
If they email HLI, I believe they can get a copy of the boycott list.
That's
okay,
correct.
I'll put the email in the bio.
No, it's a great resource. It's a tool.
Yeah.
It's like any other tool. And so I would say that, don't let it frustrate you when you start opening, oh my goodness, I shop there all the time. There are options, and evaluate it. But again, just using good prudential judgment and just being able to approach things. And
don't become handicapped. Don't look at it and panic and not know what to do and just not do anything. Like, it's just to be able to help you make decisions, not to
Just great advice, Colleen,
you.
for the first things of how to address that particular month that we're approaching, where people are going to be, maybe bombarded with all these images.
Yeah.
Just don't become overwhelmed by it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Father. This was I just wanted to use this opportunity to have this kind of discussion of what kind of practical things we can do. And how we can engage in it.
And may I just make one last little plea? And that would be now just to kind of turn it around. And that would be back to what we did in the beginning. Mm-hmm. Become involved, though.
Yes.
Find out what's happening in your community. In the faith community, parents ought to unite with each other, help each other, support each other. For those that have a little more active in the public square, talk to the local Congress people.
Write letters to the editor.
Right. Pick up a phone. Write a letter. Address the local chapters. That are dealing with government in your community. If these things really are a concern to you, then get involved. But approach it, as we all do, starting with the fact that this is a concern that affects all of us, and we know that we're sadly we're up against. I just wrote an article that when you're constantly having to rebut media, government, and so many other things, it's tiring.
Yeah.
And like you just said, it's easy to say, I'm just not. No, that's not the approach either. But it can be very tiring. But I think it's important for us, to bring this to the forefront, to get involved in the conversation, and to address it on where we can, how we can, and just keep moving that conversation. Because if more people really do voice themselves and unite, then you can change. And I think we need to,
as we saw with Bud Light.
Right. And I do believe that we need not to be afraid of being labeled. The labels are wrong. Don't get me wrong. There are some people that don't take the approach that we're advocating for right now. I don't advocate for that at all, meaning hostility, anger, that's not the approach. But at the same time, silence is not the response either. And so to me, this is a moment for us to show that if we unite, and we're not making, this is not a hate speech. We don't hate anyone. If we did that, go against our own teaching, go against our own gospel. And so, but we should not let them label us that way and then intimidate us to feel that we can't talk about this. That if you do, we're just going to, marginalize you. We're just going to cancel you out. That's being done. But we should not allow that to prevent us from doing the right thing.
Exactly.
And that's what I want to end with, because I think it's important not to be silenced and not to be afraid.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Father. And to all of our listeners, please remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Thank you for joining us here today. And keep on living the culture of life. Thank you, and God bless.